Hello everyone, my name is Catherine Sofel. I am a registered dietitian and today I will be going over the no concentrated sweets diet. It's also known as the low concentrated sweets diet or the NCS diet. So for today's objectives, we are going to have you understand what an NSC diet is, and basically go over the target population, so which individuals would be on the no concentrated sweets diet, the foods and drinks to avoid, as well as the foods and drinks that are going to be allowed to be consumed on the no concentrated sweets diet. And then lastly, we will go over a quick quiz just to kind of review everything that we've learned thus far. So what is the no concentrated sweets diet? It is basically a regular diet with low or no concentrated sweets. So a regular diet would be the most liberal diet, and then when we add on basically it's a restriction of the concentrated sweet items within the regular diet. And we'll go in more into depth about what those types of items are that would be restricted and considered concentrated sweets that we would want to restrict in this population. So again, it's more of a liberalized diet compared to the standard diabetic diet. So on one side we have the regular diet that is going to be least restrictive, and then we have the diabetic diet, which is going to be a little bit more restrictive. And then somewhere in the middle there between the two, we have the no concentrated sweets diet. And basically the no concentrated sweets diet helps to control blood sugar levels by reducing the consumption of simple sugars or those concentrated sweet food or drink items. So there are two different types of carbohydrates. All carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars as they are eaten and digested by individuals. And the two types of carbohydrates that we have are going to be your simple carbohydrates or your complex carbohydrates. And most simple carbohydrates or sugars are going to be considered the concentrated sweets. So these would be the items that we would want to restrict on the no concentrated sweets diet. Simple carbohydrates cause a quick increase in blood glucose levels, which is why we would want to restrict these items for someone who is at risk for having hyperglycemia or increased blood glucose levels. So by restricting or limiting the simple carbohydrate consumption, we help then to prevent increases in the blood glucose levels. Now, on the other hand, we have complex carbohydrates. So not all carbohydrates are the same. Complex carbohydrates are going to be types of carbohydrates that contain fiber, and that fiber within the carbohydrates actually helps to slow down the digestion and the breakdown. So when we have a more slow, gradual breakdown of carbohydrates, specifically foods that do have fiber, we don't see as big as a rise in the blood glucose levels compared to an item that is going to be made up of simple carbohydrates. And so concentrated sweets, we have a kind of a diagram here. So at the very top we have total sugars, and then within total sugars there are two different types. We have free sugars, which include all sugars defined as added sugars or the sugar component of items such as honey, fruit juice concentrates. And then we have intrinsic sugars. These are going to be naturally occurring sugars that are within fruits, vegetables, and milk. Now within the free sugars category, we have added sugars, which are going to be in the form of dextrose, fructose, sucrose, lactose, sugar syrups, and fruit syrups. Now typically if you look at the back of a food label, a lot of times it has, not always, but sometimes it does have the total carbohydrate amount, and then it'll have the amount of added sugar. So those food items are going to have sugars that are going to be added to them, which increases the sugar concentration. And then we have naturally occurring sugars that are going to be found in honey, fruit juice concentrates, residual fruit sugar, and then also found in alcoholic beverages that's going to be fermented from fruit. Now we have a glucose response to different types of carbohydrates. So the more complex carbohydrates is going to be in this yellow diagram here. And these are going to be foods that are going to be lower on that glycemic index, meaning, again, when we consume foods that have a higher amount of fiber, they cause a lower spike in those blood glucose levels because they're going to be digested and broken down more slowly at a more gradual pace. And so that then elicits a lower glycemic index response within the blood glucose levels here. So we have a smaller spike for the rise in the glucose levels. And then with concentrated sweets or food items that have a higher glycemic index, we see a much faster rise and fall with those blood glucose levels. So again, those simple carbohydrates or those simple sugars are broken down much faster compared to your complex carbohydrates, and they also elicit a much larger glucose response or hyperglycemia. So that is part of the reason why there's two different types of carbohydrates. So when we're specifically looking at the no concentrated sweet diet, it's really going to be eliminating the foods or reducing the foods consumed that elicit this large blood glucose level spike. So here's just a diagram of the blood glucose chart. And we have normal glucose levels, impaired glucose levels, and then we have diabetic glucose levels. So typically an individual who does not have diabetes or any impaired glucose metabolism, our fasting glucose levels are going to be between 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. After eating, it's normal to have a increase in your blood glucose levels, just as you are consuming and those food items are being broken down into the blood, because all carbohydrates are going to be broken down into glucose to fuel the body and the brain. But if we do not have an impairment in our blood glucose or in our insulin production, then we have insulin that is secreted, and then after 2 or 3 hours of eating, we see a decrease in those blood glucose levels. Now, someone with impaired glucose levels, their fasting or their fasting blood glucose levels at a baseline without any food consumption is going to be a little bit higher, around a 100 to 125. And then after eating, we're going to see a larger increase in those blood glucose levels up to about 230 milligrams per deciliter. And then again, after 2 or 3 hours, because there is still insulin being produced even if you are impaired glucose, we have a decrease in those blood glucose levels, but it may not be as much as a decrease compared to someone without an impaired glucose metabolism. Now, in diabetics, fasting glucose levels are typically going to average around 126 at a fasting. After eating, we may see spikes, in the 200 to 300 sometimes, and then even 2 to 3 hours after eating, an individual may still have pretty high blood glucose levels, even after insulin has been utilized. So the goal is to have blood glucose levels, 2 to 3 hours after eating, as close to the 120 to 140 range as possible. Now, these are our A1C target levels, and the A1C basically tells us the average blood glucose levels over about 3-month time period. And so when we look at the A1C target levels, it kind of tells us an idea of, again, what those average glucose levels an individual has had over the past 3 months or so. In someone without diabetes or without impaired glucose metabolism or prediabetes, normal A1C levels are going to be about 5.6. Now, in individuals with prediabetes, someone who may be at risk for developing diabetes, kind of borderline diabetes, we may see a little bit higher A1C levels, again, because their fasting glucose levels and their glucose levels even after eating are going to be slightly higher compared to someone without any impaired metabolism. And so those A1C levels will be around 5.6 to 6.5 or 6.4. Now, with an individual with diabetes, the A1C, if it's above 6.5, that is an indicator of diabetes. And so that's kind of how we use to measure the A1C levels, basically, in the blood glucose level over time. Now, these are the target levels. So in individuals with diabetes, the target levels for diabetics is to have an A1C less than 7. Now, in elderly individuals, and this may be, specifically pertinent to long-term care facilities where we have an older or a higher elderly population. So, elderly population that is 80 years old or above, the goal for their A1C is going to be less than 8, because we allow a little bit more liberalization just due to as we age, we do have some normal impaired glucose levels. So the A1C target for individuals in the elderly population over 80 years old, an A1C less than 8 is considered normal. Now, why is this diet important, and who is our target population? The target population for an individual who we may put on a no concentrated sweets diet is going to be a pre-diabetic who is at risk for developing diabetes. And this is because they don't necessarily need to be on a strict diabetic diet and having a consistent amount of carbohydrates, but we are just wanting to limit the amount of concentrated sweets that person may be consuming in order to help reduce those spikes in those glucose levels. It may also be beneficial for diabetics who do have controlled blood glucose levels and a normal A1C level. So again, if we can be liberal with the diet in individuals who do have controlled glucose levels and a normal A1C, then it may be possible to, again, be a little bit more liberal with the diet compared to a diabetic diet and providing them with a regular diet but restricted in those concentrated sweet consumption of foods and drinks. Now, for individuals who are diabetics and they have a poor oral intake, sometimes a liberalization of the diet may be important. So if you have an individual who has a poor appetite, a poor intake, and they're really not consuming much food at all, if they're consuming less than 25% of their meals, sometimes having concentrated sweets may be better than them not consuming any food at all. So this can be sometimes a temporary diet that they may be put on just until their appetite and their oral intake improves. So we want to kind of be a little bit more liberalized with people if they have a poor intake. And then another group of individuals who would be on the no concentrated sweets diet is going to be people who do not have diabetes, so non-diabetics, but who have uncontrolled blood glucose levels. So although they may not be diagnosed as a pre-diabetic or a diabetic, if they are experiencing high blood glucose levels, there's a variety of reasons why they may have hyperglycemia. We would want to restrict the concentrated sweet consumption to avoid hyperglycemia. And the hyperglycemia that can be seen with non-diabetics could be due to steroids that are given or medication-induced hyperglycemia. And then lastly, individuals who may be experiencing diarrhea. Sometimes a high sugar concentrated diet can exacerbate the diarrhea. And so we would want to temporarily restrict the intake of concentrated sweets and sugar to hopefully maybe manage the diarrhea and reduce it. So steroid-induced hyperglycemia, I would say, is probably maybe one of the biggest reasons why a non-diabetic may be on a no concentrated sweets diet. And this is because steroids or corticosteroids stimulate glucose production by the liver and actually inhibit peripheral glucose uptake. So we have two things going on here. Steroids increase the glucose that is produced by the liver, and then we have reduced glucose uptake. So our cells are then not taking up as much glucose into their cells, and that glucose is then lingering within the blood and it's not being utilized properly, thus leading to hyperglycemia. And so again, hyperglycemia is a common adverse reaction of steroids. Again, typically steroids are going to be a temporary medication. So during this time period, if an individual is experiencing hyperglycemia, typically above 180 milligrams per deciliter, then providing them with a diet that is limited in the concentrated sweets to avoid hyperglycemia may be important. And actually about 20 to 50% of patients who do not have a history of diabetes actually experience steroid-induced hyperglycemia. So it is a pretty common adverse reaction that does happen with steroid medication. And typically once an individual is off those steroids, we see an improvement in their hyperglycemia pretty quickly after their steroid regimen is complete. So health factors of hyperglycemia. Over time, hyperglycemia or uncontrolled blood glucose levels can cause heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, eye problems, dental disease, and nerve damage. Some of the symptoms of hyperglycemia include excessive thirst, tired or weakness, headaches, frequent urination, and blurred vision. So if anyone is experiencing some of these symptoms and they have not been diagnosed with diabetes already, or there may be some of these signs that are going on, it may be a good idea to have their blood glucose levels checked to see if some of these signs and symptoms are the result of hyperglycemia. Now next we're going to go over the food groups, foods that we want to consume and foods that we want to limit on the no concentrated sweets diet. So first we're going to go over breads and starches, and again these are mostly our carbohydrate containing foods. So foods that are going to be allowed or recommended on a no concentrated sweets diet are going to be whole wheat products such as whole wheat bread, crackers, muffins. So these food items again have a higher fiber content compared to white bread products. Therefore they're going to be not digested as quickly and limiting the spike of those glucose levels. Other foods that are going to be allowed: popcorn, cooked cereals such as oatmeal, pretzels, unsweetened dry cereals, potatoes, either types of potato, white or sweet potatoes, and then brown rice. So again, most of these food items, or majority of these food items, are going to be higher in fiber, which is these carbohydrates will be digested more slowly. And then foods to avoid or limit: sweetened rolls, pastries, bread, donuts, muffins, granola bars, popcorn that is coated with caramel or kettle corn, again the higher amount of sugar with these types of items, sugar coated or honey glazed cereal, glazed sweet potatoes, beans prepared with sugar or molasses, and then french fries as well. Fruits allowed are going to be any type of fresh or frozen fruits without any added sugar to them. Canned fruits without sugar or syrup, and then unsweetened applesauce is also going to be allowed. Foods to avoid or limit is going to be fruit juice, fruit drinks, or fruit punch. This is basically just fruit without any additional fiber. So the fiber in fruit actually again helps to slow down the digestion of these food items so we don't have a big spike. When we take fruit and we juice it, we are losing a lot of that fiber content, or actually all of the fiber content, and so this just becomes a sugar drink, which is going to spike the glucose levels, which is why individuals who have diabetes and let's say they are experiencing hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, we give them juice in order to help bring up their glucose levels. So fruit juice does cause a spike in glucose levels. We want to avoid or limit canned fruit, that is canned and in heavy or light syrup even, that is going to be again a source of concentrated sugar. And then dried fruit also typically is going to be avoided or limited, because when we dry the fruit actually becomes more concentrated. The sugars in the fruit becomes more concentrated compared to fresh fruit or frozen fruit that's not dried. Vegetables. Most vegetables are allowed: fresh, frozen, or canned vegetables. Typically these items don't have any added sugar to them. However, if they are sugar-coated or glazed vegetables, such as glazed carrots with brown sugar, this may be an item that is going to want to be avoided or limited, again because of that sugar glaze on top of it. Milk and yogurt. Unflavored milk of any kind is okay. Although there is naturally occurring sugars within milk, it's not a significant amount, and so that's still going to be allowed. Now, if you are, there are milk alternatives such as almond, soy, or oat milk. There are different types of milk alternatives. Ones that are unsweetened and sweetened, we would want to avoid and only consume the unsweetened milk alternatives. And then for yogurt, any type of unsweetened or sugar-free yogurt is allowed. Greek yogurt is a great type of yogurt to have if there's a history of hyperglycemia, because that protein within the Greek yogurt actually helps to reduce spikes in the glucose levels. And then milk and yogurt items to avoid are going to be chocolate or strawberry milk. So again, those sweetened milk drinks, sweetened milk or milkshakes, and then yogurt that has added sugar to it. Now, meat and meat alternatives, foods that are going to be allowed and recommended are going to be chicken, turkey, beef, pork, legumes, beans, tofu, and nuts. So protein food items do not cause a direct spike in glucose level. Actually, protein foods help to, again, slow down the rate of digestion in order to help prevent glucose spikes. And naturally occurring, protein foods do not contain carbohydrates, and so therefore they wouldn't spike glucose levels. Foods to avoid and limit in the meat and meat alternative category are going to be glazed meats, such as honey glazed ham, which is, again, that honey component is going to be a source of sugar or sweetened that may increase blood glucose levels. And then for nuts, wanting to avoid chocolate covered or any type of sweetened nuts. So just having plain nuts would be the recommendation. Now, a combination food item category. Foods allowed are recommended. Most types of soups, and then any type of sugar-free items such as sugar-free pudding or jello, vanilla wafers, angel food cake. So these two items, the vanilla wafers and angel food cake, they do have a source of sugar, but the amount of sugar within them compared to other types of baked goods is going to be less. Sugar-free cookies, sugar-free ice cream, sugar-free candy. For your jelly and syrup, there are sugar-free jelly and syrup options, so that is going to be the recommendation. And then any individual that wants sugar alternatives are going to be the recommendation instead of having regular sugar. So providing Splenda, Equal, Sweet and Low, Stevia, these would be the sugar alternative preferred options. Foods to avoid and limit, pies, cakes, pastries, cookies, or sweetened desserts. And these food items are going to be very heavily concentrated in sugar and will cause a pretty high spike in your blood glucose levels, similar to candy or candy bars, regular jello, pudding, or ice cream, all going to have a pretty high amount of sugar in them. Honey, molasses, and brown sugar as well would want to be limited or avoided, and then regular jams or jellies, and then frosting as well. So these are all sources of what I would consider your concentrated sweets that would want to be avoided for someone who are wanting to restrict those items for. Beverages. Water, Crystal Light, Gatorade Zero, any type of your diet drink such as diet soda, unsweetened tea, unsweetened coffee, these are all going to be allowed food items. Again, they're not going to be a source of concentrated sweets. Crystal Light is a great item to have if it is available. That way, if people do not necessarily enjoy drinking water, having Crystal Light available can help sweeten the water beverage, increase the consumption of fluid in water without having the effects of the sugar concentration within it. Foods to avoid or limit, regular soda, fruit juice, Kool-Aid, regular sports drinks such as Gatorade. Since regular Gatorade, again, is going to be a source of sugar, it does have a lot of added sugar to it. We'd want to avoid Gatorade and provide Gatorade Zero if available. Sweet tea and sweet coffee as well would want to be foods to limit or avoid. And then some other condiments or miscellaneous items. Artificial sweeteners, again, the Splenda, Equal, Sweet and Low, any types of spices or herbs, salt, pepper, ketchup, mustard, soy sauce, dill pickles, these are all going to be fairly low sugar content, pretty minimal. And then foods to avoid or limit, sugar packets, brown sugar, and then sweet pickles. So just some tips. Now, there are a lot of sugar-free foods as well as other foods listed in the allowed common that aren't necessarily carbohydrate free. So it is important to be mindful of that most foods are going to contain a source of carbohydrate, which is why this diet isn't necessarily recommended for diabetics, because they're not all carbohydrate free. So specifically, if someone is on an insulin regimen, it's going to still be important to kind of monitor the amount of carbohydrates that are consumed on a no concentrated sweet diet. And because of this, since they are not all carbohydrate free, these foods may still increase blood glucose levels, and the amount should be monitored. So now we are going to move along into the quiz. Question number 1. A no concentrated sweets diet, or an NCS diet, is designed for all the following groups except for who? A. Pre-diabetics at risk for diabetes. B. Type 1 diabetics. C. Type 2 diabetics with controlled blood glucose levels. Or D. Non-diabetics with hyperglycemia. So the answer is going to be B. The no concentrated sweets diet is not designed for individuals with type 1 diabetes, and this is because their body does not produce insulin, and so because they are on a strict insulin regimen, it's going to be important to be on a diabetic diet in order to have a consistent amount of carbohydrates. Which of the following statements is true? A NCS diet is more strict than a diabetic diet. An NCS diet restricts salt and sugar. NCS diet is more liberal than a diabetic diet. Or D, NCS diet does not help with hyperglycemia. So which of the following statements is true? The answer is C. A no concentrated sweets diet is more liberal than a diabetic diet. So this is the only true answer for this question. So again, on the scale for restrictiveness, we have the regular diet that is going to be least restrictive, and then we have the diabetic diet, and somewhere in the middle is going to be the no concentrated sweets diet. So it's going to be a little bit more liberal compared to the diabetic diet. Question 3. What accurately describes the differences between complex versus simple carbohydrates? A. Simple carbohydrates are simple sugars broken down easily and increase blood glucose. Complex carbohydrates are broken down fast but do not increase blood glucose as easily as simple carbohydrates. C. Simple and complex carbohydrates are broken down into sugars and cause the same increase in blood glucose. Or D. All of the above. So which statement accurately describes the difference between complex versus simple carbohydrates? The answer is A. The true statement between simple and complex carbohydrates is that simple carbohydrates are simple sugars broken down easily and increase blood glucose levels. So this B statement, complex carbohydrates are broken down fast, this is false. Complex carbohydrates are going to be those carbohydrates that contain fiber, and so they are actually broken down slower and do not cause as high as a blood glucose spike. Question 4. Which of the following breakfast orders is appropriate for a no concentrated sweets diet? A. Scrambled eggs, fruit cup, whole wheat toast, jelly, chocolate milk. B. Pancakes, syrup, orange juice, bacon. C. Oatmeal, brown sugar, banana, sausage, sweet tea. Or D. Omelet, fruit cup, whole wheat muffin, black coffee. The correct answer is D. An omelet, fruit cup, whole wheat muffin, and black coffee would be an appropriate breakfast order for the no concentrated sweets diet. In letter A, chocolate milk would not be allowed. In B, regular syrup would not be allowed. And then in C, brown sugar or sweet tea would not be allowed. Last question, number 5. Which of the following items would be appropriate snacks for a no concentrated sweets diet? A, sugar-free pudding or jello, whole wheat crackers, pretzels, low-fat milk. B, canned peaches and light syrup, graham crackers, peanut butter, sweetened cereal. C, strawberry milk, donuts, yogurt with sweetener. Or D, granola bar, ice cream, Kool-Aid pudding. The answer, which of the following items would be appropriate snacks for a no concentrated sweets diet, would be sugar-free jello. Answer A, sugar-free pudding or jello, whole wheat crackers, pretzels, or low-fat milk. These are all going to be foods allowed on the no concentrated sweets diet. And that concludes today's speak on the no concentrated sweets diet. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.